AJ Dybantsa signing with the BYU basketball program was just a revolutionary and absolutely wild thing that came out of yesterday. What does it mean for BYU basketball now as you look forward? Because, frankly, he's not going to enroll at BYU until next fall. So how do things get balanced out here? What do we expect from BYU basketball? Let's delve into that and also look at the future of BYU athletics and the recruiting sphere overall.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who we like to call our everydayers right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege, and get $20 off your first purchase, courtesy of our friends over at Game Time. All right, let's talk BYU basketball. If you are living under a shell or you just came out of a coma, it's hard to imagine that you missed out on the news yesterday on ESPN's First Take. AJ Dybantsa pulls off his jacket, wearing a BYU shirt, pulls on a BYU cap, and announces his commitment to BYU. Little did we know, just seemingly a few minutes later, it was maybe more like an hour or so later, we find out that Dybantsa actually was already signed, sealed, and delivered, to use that expression, to BYU Football 3 weeks ago. He had signed in the early signing window. It was like November 13th through the 20th. There was a full week there where athletes could sign early with regards to college basketball. And he actually signed there and kept it hush-hush until he made this announcement on ESPN's First Take. I got to admit, watching Stephen A's face just deal with and kind of figure out how to address the questions that he had for Dybantsa with regards to his commitment and why he didn't pick UNC, Kansas, and or Alabama, it was pretty fun to watch. But the bigger picture here for BYU basketball is that AJ Dybantsa is not going to enroll in Provo and enroll in school at BYU until next fall. He will not be enrolling until fall semester next year. He has a whole prep season still to play out with Utah Prep Academy, and ultimately we'll see how things transpire. But the bigger point to be made here is, what in the world is BYU gotten themselves into? Because I talked about it a little bit on the special edition of the podcast that I did, talking and reacting to AJ Dybantsa's commitment in the literal moments after it happened. But the bigger topic I think that needs to be expounded upon is BYU has entered a whole new era for themselves. Now, there was a report out there from a New York Times reporter saying that BYU is paying $7 million in NIL to get AJ Dybantsa to Provo. Is that number accurate? There's a number of you who have been asking me that all day long. As close as I can get, and I don't proclaim to have the know-all, be-all sources on this, $7 million is a tad bit high from what I understand. As I understand it, it's multiple millions of dollars, but I've heard anywhere from the $3 million range to as high as $5 million. Regardless, that is unprecedented money that BYU is spending. But once again, we are in unprecedented times in college sports. What BYU just did to secure the signing and play of AJ Dybantsa for their basketball program a mere 5 years ago would have potentially landed them the NCAA death penalty. Think about that. It is not that long ago, the NCAA, if you were paying players and they were able to find out about it, they would essentially nail you to a wall and make an example of you. Now it's all legal. Now it's all above board. It's above table. Now, there are seedy elements to all of it with regards to NIL still, but what used to be absolutely verboten, to use the German term, is now totally okay. And BYU, I congratulate whoever ultimately had the call on this to greenlight BYU jumping headlong into the NIL sphere and being willing to pony up millions, in this case of dollars, to secure guys like AJ Dybantsa. Awesome. It is awesome to see that. Now, the crazy thing is, and a lot of you out there that study economics and know more about business than I ever will can back me up on this. BYU could pay a guy like AJ Dybantsa X number of millions of dollars, and already what he has done to raise the profile of BYU basketball and BYU athletics by extension, simply by making that commitment on national television on ESPN's First Take, which is one of the premier embrace debate programs in all of football, basketball, and sports programming in general. To do that in that sphere, the exposure itself is worth millions of dollars in its own right. Already, AJ Dybantsa and his commitment to BYU, I think, is worth every dollar, dime, nickel, penny that BYU paid him to secure his signature on his national letter of intent. It will only continue to generate revenue with the attention he will draw to BYU simply by what he has ultimately done to elevate what BYU is doing. The other thing about it is on the recruiting side of things, I'm telling you, every athlete that has any illusions of making it to the NBA will have a keen eye now on Provo, Utah. Obviously, in this year's recruiting cycle, you have guys like Jaeger Demon and Cannon Catchings, who obviously are going to be guys that are going to be scrutinized when it comes to the NBA draft next year. And then when you add AJ Dybantsa to the mix next year, and he is the presumptive number one overall pick in the 2026 NBA draft, if you can deliver, speaking of Kevin Young, top tier NBA draft talent, and it succeeds and thrives and absolutely does what it's supposed to do in Provo, it is only going to be a self-feeding machine for the BYU basketball program. Yes, it will become a one-and-done factory. Guys are going to come in, develop themselves for a period of time, maybe not all of them one-and-doners, but maybe 1, 2, 3 years at most, and then they're off to the NBA looking to make their fortunes at the professional level. Kevin Young, he said it himself. He said, this is not a hypothetical. He says, I've done this before. I am a player development guy. And it was a video. BYU put out all kinds of social media. And by the way, props to them on the way that they embraced everything that came with the exposure that AJ Dybantsa generated yesterday. But he talked about it. It's not a hypothetical. I can back up what I am saying by calling guys like Chris Paul, Devin Booker. In the case of AJ Dybantsa, he said his favorite player of all time is Kevin Durant. Well, all you have to do if you're Kevin Young is say, hey, KD, can you talk to this kid real quick and tell him what I did for you in your career? And even in the short time we worked together relatively in Phoenix, he can call up a Paul George. And actually, I'm sure that Paul George, he never played for Kevin Young that I recall, but the connections they have in the league. When Kevin Young talked yesterday to the media, he said that he actually has a thought that the defensive capability of what AJ Dybantsa could become is Paul George-esque. AJ Dybantsa himself said he models his game more after Tracy McGrady and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Now, some of you young bucks don't recall how good T-Mac was back in the 2000s. I can tell you, Tracy McGrady at the peak of his powers, I'm telling you, that's probably the best offensive comparison I can think of to what you're seeing with AJ Dybantsa right now. And any of you who watched Tracy McGrady in his heyday know how good he was. We are watching a guy who has got top tier talent, top shelf capability, and also he will generate millions of dollars in exposure, if not outright just monetary income for BYU basketball that will pay back BYU tenfold of what they paid him to come to Provo to play basketball for Kevin Young. It is absolutely incredible to watch what BYU is doing here. Now, there'll be some of you who say, well, is it going to cause issues? He's making this much money. His teammates are not going to make as much. That's a great question. But in the meantime, let's just celebrate the fact that BYU, I've said it before on this podcast, I'll say it again, there was a long period of BYU embracing, we do more with less. Speaking of the monetary and investment they had in their sports, and they did very good work and won at an extremely high level relative to the investment they had. I think BYU is finally embracing, as I have been advocating for a long time, do more with more, invest in sports, have the funds necessary to compete at a national level. Because once again, when you have success, both on the gridiron in football, on the hardwoods in basketball, and everything in between, the attention that comes back to BYU in the positive fashion pays for everything you invested on multiple times over. So this is a really, really cool era that BYU is entering. And I, for one, I'm here for it. I don't care how short a time ultimately that AJ Dybantsa spends at BYU, because I just can't wait to watch it, break it down, track it, analyze it, do everything within my power to share it with you, Cougar fans out there. And it feels like we're embarking on a pretty incredible journey here, and who knows where it ultimately ends up. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk a little bit more about the impact of the Dybantsa, what he can do for BYU, and can it elevate BYU across the board? The adage is rising tides lift all boats. Let's talk about if this can ultimately impact BYU as a whole in a positive way, and we'll delve into that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, Game Time is here for you guys to get you out to the events you want to go to, whether it's sporting events, theater, comedy, you have a favorite musician who's coming in concert, whatever it is. They've got the tickets for you guys, and right now they have a brand new feature on their app called Game Time Picks, which makes getting your tickets to your favorite see your favorite teams and other events in person even easier than before. It filters through thousands of other tickets to find you only incredible deals on great seats, so you can have the best experience possible. And it's all courtesy of your friends over at Game Time. They also have incredible seat views inside the app. You can know exactly what to expect with regards to where your vantage point will be. They have all-in pricing. You toggle that feature, tells you exactly what you're paying right up front, including all fees. And also they have their Game Time ticket coverage. Your ticket is covered the most flexible customer service policy in the entire ticketing industry. So take advantage of this offer and take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with the Game Time Picks feature on the Game Time app. All you got to do is download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. Jake Hatch here along for the ride on this Wednesday. I hope you guys are doing fantastic out there. Now, with AJ Dybantsa committing to BYU, I mentioned the fact that the overall attention that he thrust upon BYU in a very positive light, because he pushed back against some criticism from Stephen A. Smith saying, hey, I can thrive here. And I believe that everything BYU has implemented NBA-wise, they've got an NBA strength and conditioning coach. They got a nutritionist, mental performance coach, the assistant coaching pool, along with Kevin Young as the head coach, have all got NBA or G League experience. And he says, my whole goal is to make it to the NBA, and they're going to help me get there. So the overall impact that AJ Dybantsa is going to have for BYU basketball, it's immeasurable. But I also believe that this can have a positive impact across the board for BYU athletics. Tom Holmoe, obviously up at the university level, you have President Reese, as well as Keith Vorking, because the advancement vice president. They've all got to be looking at this and trying to strategically figure out how to best take advantage to have the overall impact. Obviously, as I said, the adage is rising tide lifts all boats. You want to have BYU athletics thrust upwards overall as a result of what AJ Dybantsa is bringing to BYU attention-wise. I believe that even though he is committing as a basketball sensation, a 100 rated 24/7 prospect, we're talking guys that have had that rating include such guys, and obviously some of them didn't play at the collegiate level, but guys like LeBron James. We saw Carmelo Anthony go one and done, obviously win that national championship at Syracuse, but if I'm not mistaken, he was a 100 rated athlete from 24/7 Sports. Can the impact of what AJ Dybantsa has done in picking BYU over literally everybody else as the best prospect in his recruiting class, can that help programs like BYU basketball? Could it help a program like BYU baseball, who seems to be really down on its luck right now and needs an injection of talent? There are going to be athletes, I think, even outside the basketball realm, who are going to say, hey, this guy AJ Dybantsa was on national TV and picked Brigham Young University. Why would he go there? What does it offer? Why would he pick a school in Provo, Utah? What am I missing here? And I think that's something that BYU needs to take advantage of and raise their profile. Maybe they put together a national ad campaign and start to promote themselves a little more heavily nationally, saying, hey, we are BYU. This is what we're all about. Come find out more and be a part of it. That's the crazy thing about this is BYU has an opportunity here to strike while the iron is hot and cash in on this publicity. It is a very, very big magnifying glass that's being put on BYU right now, especially BYU basketball. But Kalani Sitake in the BYU football program, he's got to be looking at this. And I'm just going to use an example. Let's take Ryder Burton. Ryder Burton's a 5-star prospect, considered by some to be the top quarterback prospect in the 2026 recruiting cycle. And we'll talk about the first commitment of the 2026 cycle for BYU momentarily in Justice Brathwaite. But a guy like Ryder Lyons could cash in any number of NIL opportunities, play anywhere he wants in this country, wherever he wants. Can a guy like Kalani Sitake and the BYU staff, Aaron Roderick, Matt Mitchell, obviously, who coached up the quarterbacks for BYU, could they go to Ryder Burton and say, hey, you see what AJ Dybantsa just did for BYU and the attention that he is going to have cast upon him? Why don't you be the BYU football equivalent of that? That's what BYU's got to take advantage of here. And I think a program like BYU baseball, which needs, I think, an infusion of overall talent. I don't mean to make it sound like BYU baseball is down on the deck, but they're pretty down. Can you go out there and tell guys, hey, come play baseball for us and be the AJ Dybantsa equivalent for BYU baseball? Help us raise our profile as well. That's where I'm interested to see how BYU takes advantage of this, because I don't think it has to be just the basketball program that gets the bump, because trust me, the basketball program has had a pretty impressive bump ever since Kevin Young stepped foot on BYU's campus. It's incredible to hear him talk. He talked about it yesterday, how he was in the middle of a playoff run with the Phoenix Suns. He sprinted out of practice, took a private jet, flew to Provo just to meet up with AJ Dybantsa's parents the very first week or days, I guess, after he officially got the job, simply to establish a relationship with Ace Dybantsa and the Dybantsa family. That's a guy who understands striking while the iron is hot. And I hope that BYU athletics can kind of catch that vision the BYU basketball has with Kevin Young at the helm. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll just kind of let it sit on its own, where it lifts the boat of BYU basketball, while the other ones essentially are left to kind of to their own devices. But I don't think that's the right philosophy for BYU to have in this circumstance. Take advantage of this. Raise the profile of BYU, Brigham Young University. We all know that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a sponsoring institution, and they have been very proud of what BYU has meant to the world. They talk all the time. It's on the sign as you drive into BYU campus. The world is our campus. And enter to learn, go forth to serve. Why not take advantage of this with athletics? Because we hear all the time that athletics is the front porch of a university, and BYU is one of those universities that absolutely people associate with their athletics department and their athletics programs, particularly football and basketball. Take advantage of this. Really, really hammer down and trying to find strategic ways to cash in on this opportunity and raise the profile of BYU athletics. I'd love nothing more as a guy who grew up around the university, has watched to kind of morph into what it is today. And now the fact that the Power 4 level, at the top tier of college football and college athletics, why not continue to try and climb and build and become one of the preeminent powers in college athletics? Yes, that may be a little bit of a pipe dream considering some of the investment other programs and universities are putting into athletics. You don't have to look any further than what Phil Knight is doing with Oregon and Oregon football. You look at Ohio State, Michigan, Texas, Alabama. Like, there are programs out there who are injecting hundreds of millions of dollars into their athletic departments. Is BYU willing to go to that level? TBD, but I think that BYU can make a very strong push here and really kind of push themselves up in that pantheon of programs out there in college athletics, basketball, and football, most particularly, and really establish themselves as, hey, we are players on this level. We have NIL funds that rival anybody if we really are motivated to do it. We have boosters who are willing to put the money where their mouth is. We have the revenue share. I expect the BYU will announce, maybe they won't announce it, but I fully expect them to fully do the full revenue sharing that's going to come into effect next year and pay players. I expect BYU to do all of that. And I think as so long as they continue to kind of analyze where they can make strategic investments and at the same time capitalize on the publicity, the overall attention that's being thrust upon BYU right now, just simply due to what AJ Dybantsa has done, the success of BYU football this year at 10-2. All of that is stuff that BYU can use to their advantage. And I sincerely hope they do take advantage of it, because they should. And if they don't, it would be a major missed opportunity, I feel like, for BYU athletics. And I hope that they kind of, like, once again, catch that vision. I think Kevin Young's got the vision, and he's talked about what he envisions doing for BYU basketball. I hope all parties, we're talking administration, coaches, players, everybody involved in BYU athletics, should take notes from what KYU is showing, kind of the roadmap he's laying out there. And hopefully BYU can, I said, put the money where their mouth is to make all boats in the BYU athletic department and overall Brigham Young University can be elevated as a result of what's happening right now with BYU sports. All right, coming up next, we'll flip over to football just for a moment. We're going to talk recruiting. Justice Brathwaite has committed to the BYU football program. Now, similar to AJ Dybantsa, he is a member of the 2026 recruiting cycle, so he's a ways off before enrolling at BYU, but he's got a pretty familiar last name for some of you of a certain age, including myself. We'll talk about what he brings to BYU, and we'll get into that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys to help you tackle the NFL action all season long, as FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. It's as simple as that. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything to place your live bets on the NFL all in one place. So you get the hunch in the middle of a game. You want to check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more to make sure you're making the best decision for yourself when it comes to placing that bet. You can do it all on the same page with our friends at FanDuel. So all you got to do is visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com, and you'll get started once again with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. It's as simple as that. $5 on the line, it hits. You got $150 extra to play with. So the best part is you can take advantage of it by going to FanDuel.com. Never waste that hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. My name is Jake Hatch. For those of you who may be catching this for the very first time, I've had some people point out that I don't mention my name enough. I feel like it's right there on YouTube. You can see it if I'm pointing in the right direction. But regardless, I probably should remind people who I am a little more often. But regardless, thank you for joining us here. And if you have not done so already, join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Get the inside scoop on all things BYU sports I'm hearing coming to your phone in the form of a text message. You get a 14-day free trial to sign up initially, and then you're charged just $5 a month after that for the access that you crave. And once again, there's not having to go to a website or a message board to get the insider intel you crave. It comes to your phone in the form of a text message. You can have one-on-one conversations with myself. So join today. Link is in the show notes below, whether you're watching and or listening to this. So join us today on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right. So BYU basketball got a nice addition, I guess, an early kickoff to the 2026 recruiting cycle for BYU football in the form of an addition via Justice Brathwaite out of Higley High School down there in Arizona. Now, that last name, for some of you of a certain age, including myself, should sound familiar. Yes, it's that same Brathwaite. Reynaldo Brathwaite's son is Justice Brathwaite, who just committed to BYU. Now, I will forever remember Reynaldo Brathwaite for one play in his BYU career. I know it's sad to say, but when you go 95 yards right up the gut against San Diego State, barely get touched, and race to the other end zone for 6, it's the longest single run from scrimmage in BYU football history. I don't think it's been broken. 95 yards right up the gut in a otherwise forgettable season, honestly, the early 2000s with Gary Croton at the helm. But what an incredible player Reynaldo Brathwaite was. Well, Justice Brathwaite brings that same type of ability, albeit he's a defensive back. He plays corner for his high school down there at Higley. And we're going to try something here. I'm going to throw this up. I've been told I can share huddle highlights while I'm talking about these young men. So we're going to do just that. So I'm going to throw this up here and see if we can get this to work and let you guys kind of get a feel for what Justice Brathwaite brings to the table as I talk a little bit about what he brings to BYU football. If you watch his very first play, if you're watching this on YouTube, you see him in that coverage. He's right in the hip pocket of this receiver. And what does he do? He stays right on that guy, picks it off, and then shows that elite speed that his dad has passed on to him genetically. He lists a 4.4 40-yard dash on his recruiting profile, and he shows off that skill on a pick 6 on the very first play of this highlight reel from Huddle. It's absolutely incredible to watch what this young man is doing as only a junior in high school. He is a very, very polished athlete. And I watch these highlights and I look at it and say, you know what? I can see why BYU is more than happy to bring him in. The crazy thing about this is, remember, Reynaldo Brathwaite was teammates and contemporaries with Gennaro Guilford, and Gennaro obviously was the lead recruiter because as a cornerback, that's what Justice Brathwaite figures to play for BYU. He's got good size for the position already as a junior, 6 foot, 170 pounds. You figure he'll pack on some extra poundage once he gets into a college program, but everything he shows on this highlight reel, and if you're not watching this on YouTube, I apologize, but his skill set screams to me, you want the player comp I'm making right now? Jacob Robinson. Watch what Jacob Robinson did for BYU football over the past 2 or 3 years and tell me you don't see a lot of that with Justice Brathwaite. Now, a lot of guys will say, hey, I'm my own type of player. And yes, you should absolutely believe that if you're Justice Brathwaite. You're your own type of guy. But he's a willing tackler, puts his body on the line to make tackles at the line of scrimmage. He doesn't mind playing man coverage in zone. He has a good ability to track the ball in the air. This is a very, very solid pickup for BYU to start off the 2026 recruiting cycle. And something that Jeff Hansen from Cougar Sports Insider pointed out yesterday is that the 2026 recruiting cycle for BYU football may be the most impactful, at least potential-wise, in BYU football history. There are 5 potential 5-star talents across the board. I mentioned Ryder Burton, Brock Harris out of the Southern Utah area, could be a 5-star tight end. There are multiple 4-star prospects who have connections to BYU, whether it is members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or have connections to the BYU coaching staff. Here's the thing with Brathwaite. He's listed as a 3-star prospect right now, but I'm telling you, looking at his skill set, I wouldn't be surprised to see him bumped up over time here over the next year or so as he continues to hone his craft. BYU has a major, major opportunity to see their recruiting star rise in BYU football with guys like Brathwaite coming into the program. But once again, this is just the start of the 2026 cycle. Can they pick up some momentum here? Can Brathwaite kind of kick off? I know that the 2025 cycle is not done yet, and obviously that won't be done until February, but to get this kicked off with 2026 and the amount of talent, once again, that exists in that has connections to BYU via varied different style, BYU needs to capitalize on the 2026 recruiting cycle. And I think this is a solid pickup to have a guy like Justice Brathwaite picking BYU along the way, because once again, his dad was a very, very good player for BYU, was a teammate of Gennaro Guilford. Gennaro tapped into that ability to recruit Justice Brathwaite. And by the way, Justice is a guy who has other Power 4 offers as well. So this is not a guy that BYU is bringing over just simply because he's a legacy. No, he's legitimately a Power 4 prospect, and BYU just kicked off their 2026 cycle just a little bit earlier than other programs, and I applaud them for it. The other thing about this is, similar to what the AJ Dybantsa thing is, every time a guy commits to BYU, there are going to be athletes who know them or know of them who are going to sit up a little straighter and say, okay, what is about this Brigham Young University? What do I need to know about them? What's the kind of the catch here? Well, guess what? Guys like Justice Brathwaite, his dad knows what it takes to play at BYU. Obviously, Justice, he talked to multiple media outlets saying that I'm excited to carry on the family legacy with the BYU football program. It's awesome. He can go and espouse what BYU means to him personally and speak to what he expects to do at BYU, but it doesn't hurt. He's an incredibly talented football player and appears that he's going to only get better with time, because this guy, speaking of Justice, is he 16, 17 years old at this point and doing what he's doing at 6 foot, 170 pounds already? I'm really, really impressed with his skill set. And I think that his best football is very, very much in front of him. So I'll stop sharing this now. I think the highlight reel is getting close to the end anyways, but the bigger point to be made is that BYU is in a really, really unique ecosystem right now when it comes to recruiting. We talked about AJ Dybantsa's impact earlier on today's show. It can't be overstated what BYU has in terms of the potential it could reach here. Obviously, it's going to take effort. It's going to take some luck. It's going to take certain players ultimately saying yes to BYU and spurning other opportunities. And there are opportunities galore in this era of the transfer portal, NIL, revenue sharing coming into effect. There is more money available than ever has been available for athletes just across the board. And I am interested to see how BYU kind of operates in this new era of college athletics. It's become pro sports. I always thought that the amateurism thing that they tried to espouse at the NCAA level was a bit of a farce. Well, the mask it was wearing has been just completely ripped off, and it's a minor league for the professional sports, and it's being operated more and more like a professional sport. And that's why BYU just hired a general manager for the football program in Dave George. They already have a guy, I forget what his name is, who was hired by Kevin Young to essentially run the GM side of the things for BYU basketball. It's the former AD out there in Nevada. The name escapes me at current time of recording, and we're wrapping up here, so I'm not going to go and search it out. But this is an incredible era of BYU athletics and in college athletics overall. It's going to be very interesting to see how BYU operates overall as they try and kind of wind their way and continue to stick to their morals. That's one thing that BYU will never get away from, as they will always stick to what their university mission is. And I can appreciate that, and I endorse that wholeheartedly. They should do that. But I'm also interested to see how BYU continues to compete at a national level. But sure looks like right now, as recording of this podcast, BYU is in it to win it. And I, for one, I'm all on board to watch that play out. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the podcast. As always, thank you for all of your support. Coming up on tomorrow's podcast, we're going to flip over to football. We're talking with Connor Pay. He is back on the podcast, getting his reaction to BYU in Colorado in the Alamo Bowl. What does he make of Kalani Sitake's extension, and a whole lot more. So stick around for that on tomorrow's edition of Locked On Cougars.